Chapter 3, Part 2 of A History of the Christian Church during the First 6 Centuries. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A History of the Christian Church during the First 6 Centuries by Samuel Cheetham, Chapter 3, Part 2, The Early Struggles of the Church. What were the conditions which previously limited the freedom of Christians is not absolutely certain, but it is probable that the Edict of 311, which conferred freedom of worship on existing bodies of Christians, did not give them the liberty of making converts. If so, this restriction was removed. When the emperors give full liberty to every form of worship, whereby the divinity in heaven may be propitiated, they seem still to retain the power of putting down any foul and impious orgies which they judged likely rather to offend than to propitiate the supreme deity. But the essential thing is that the edict frankly recognized the Corpus Christianorum, the great organized body of Christians which had spread itself over the empire. It is thus indicated that the policy of the state had undergone a complete revolution. The almost despairing effort of Diocletian and Galerius had been to put down a force which, they thought, tended to dissolve the social coherence of the empire at a time when it was so sorely in need of unity. In the edict of Constantine and Licinius, we see that this attempt is abandoned. The persecutions were reckoned, before the end of the 4th century, to be 10 in number, so as to correspond to the 10 plagues of Egypt. The persecutions, according to this account, were those under Nero, Domitian, Trajan, Marcus Aurelius, Septimius Severus, Maximin, Decius, Valerian, Aurelian, Diocletian. The artificial and fallacious character of this enumeration was long ago pointed out by Augustine. It is impossible to determine with certainty the number of those who suffered. Origen, as we have seen, thought it inconsiderable up to his own time, though at a still earlier date Irenaeus speaks of the multitude of martyrs who had passed from earth to God, and in the persecutions under Decius and Diocletian, at any rate, we can scarcely doubt that very many bore torture and death for the faith of Christ. It was only natural that events, terrible in themselves and deeply affecting a great community, should be repeated in succeeding generations with much unconscious exaggeration. True and accurate accounts, even notarial records, of many martyrdoms were no doubt preserved, but round these clustered a large number of legends which either arose from the excited imagination of a troublous time, or were composed as works of edification rather than of history. Additional infamy was in this way heaped upon the persecutors, and additional glory bestowed upon the martyrs. Augustine lamented the scarcity of genuine acts which might be read in the services. While the Church was suffering from the opposition of the civil government and the passions of the mob, it was also attacked by the literary champions of heathendom. The dislike and suspicion which educated heathen felt for Christianity found definite expression in various writings. The lost oration of Fronto seems to have been an advocate's defense, on legal grounds, of the proceedings against them under Marcus Aurelius. Lucian's light raillery, which found in the Greek mythology subjects for his wit and sarcastic humor, was also turned against Christianity. He does not merely echo the popular prejudice. It is evident from his parody that he had some real knowledge of the manners and customs of Christians, but he only regards the Church as one of the varied outgrowths of human folly and superstition. His history of Peregrinus Proteus was no doubt intended, at least in part, to ridicule the supposed credulity of Christians which made them an easy prey to a clever knave, but it shows incidentally how a heathen noticed, without admiring, their brotherly love, their courage in facing death, their belief in immortality. Very different from the light mockery of Lucian is the eager hatred of his contemporary Celsus, a man of keen and vigorous intellect who had really studied, though without sympathy or insight, both Christianity and Judaism. Skepticism has hardly discovered an objection to Christianity which is not contained in some shape or other in the work of Celsus. Modern ingenuity has done little more than elaborate the arguments of the ancient dialectician. The credibility of the gospel history in general, the reality of the incarnation and the resurrection, the belief in the atonement, the very idea of a special revelation of God, are attacked with no mean ability. He utterly repudiates the view of nature in which man appears as a final cause of the world and of all things that are therein, and attempts to set Greek philosophy and religion above the teaching of Christianity, which he accuses of having borrowed and spoiled many of the doctrines of Plato. Further, he reproaches Christians with their gross corporeal conception, as he thinks it, of God and things divine. At the same time, he attempts to set the heathen polytheism and idolatry in a more attractive light, and contends that they were not incompatible with the worship of one supreme deity. Altogether, probably no more vigorous assailant than Celsus has ever attacked Christianity. The attack of so skillful a polemic is a sufficient proof that Christianity was regarded as an important phenomenon. However men might assume contempt for it, when a man like Celsus of high ability, cultivation, and learning thought it worth while to give it so careful an examination, it had certainly gained attention beyond the ranks of slaves and artisans. The remarkable work of Philostratus, the Life of Apollonius of Tyana, may also be considered as a part of the polemic against Christianity, though of a very different kind from the uncompromising attack of Celsus. Apollonius was a real person who attained some fame as a magician in the later part of the 1st century. But the life, written in the early years of the 3rd, is probably so highly idealized as to be little more than a romance with a purpose. It belongs to the synchronistic age of Septimius Severus, when the view began to prevail that the wise man should choose what was best and noblest from all religions, without venturing to assert that any one was absolutely true. Hence, Philostratus, who was evidently acquainted with the gospel history, attempts to set up Apollonius as a kind of Neo-Pythagorean leader and type. He attributes to him the nobleness, the unselfish devotion, the readiness to encounter persecution and death, which are seen in the greatest heroes. He contends, not that Christianity is false, but that Pythagorism deserves to be set above it as a practical religious power. Philosophy, in truth, took at this time a more religious direction, and was not wholly disinclined to satisfy its aspirations from a system which had so high claims to be a divine revelation as Christianity. But the man whom the early Christians singled out as their most implacable enemy, their bitterest opponent, was the Neoplatonist Porphyry. His 15 books against the Christians were the most famous production of heathen polemics in the 3rd century, and were thought worthy of refutation by such men as Methodius of Tyre, Eusebius of Caesarea, and Apollinaris of Laodicea. The refutations have perished, and but a few fragments remain of the work of Porphyry. To judge from these fragments, Porphyry made his principal attack on the Scriptures, attempting to show that they were unworthy of the divine inspiration attributed to them. He examined the book of the prophet Daniel, contending that it was not written in the 6th century before Christ, but by a later writer who lived under Antiochus Epiphanes, and that it was in fact not prophecy but history. He found great fault with such expositors as Origen, who shrouded the plain facts of Israelitish history in a veil of allegory. He fastened on the dispute between St. Peter and St. Paul in Galatia as an event discreditable to the heads of the community, and he found inconsistencies in the gospel history itself. To him also appeared to be due some questions which have frequently reappeared in controversy, such as, why did Christians reject sacrifice which God himself had instituted in the Old Covenant? Yet, with all his keen dialectic against portions of the Christian scheme, Porphyry was probably not without admiration for the character of Christ himself. The Neoplatonists were not averse to the thought of a, quote, dwelling of God among men, close quote. What they disputed was the claim of Christ Jesus to be, in an absolute and exclusive sense, God manifest in the flesh, and it was probably with a view of setting up a rival manifestation of the divinity